Well, in this week of the Brain Warriors Way podcast, we're going to continue on our journey. We're week 5 of 6. And life gets good.
Life is good for a long time. Yeah. It's the best it's ever been. It was the most, I remember having moments, I don't know if any of you have ever felt this way, where you almost are afraid to trust how good it is. It's like, this is almost too good to be true. Like I'm having, it's like, it's such a long stretch. I mean, I've had periods of time where I felt like life was pretty good in a lot of ways, but maybe everything didn't sort of fit. And all of a sudden I feel like everything is really good. And I'm like, it just is like, do I trust this?
And you write The Omni Diet, which becomes a New York Times bestselling book.
My relationship with my daughter is great. My relationship with you is amazing. Like, you know, I'm walking in my spiritual beliefs. Like everything was just sort of like all those circles, the biological, the psychological, the social, the spiritual, they're all in alignment.
Yeah. And then I guess it's about 4 years ago, last month, that we get a call from your sister, and
who I had disconnected from. Theme. Have you noticed a theme here? I'm disconnecting from people in my life.
And she was clearly in crisis.
Yeah. And I disconnected from her because our values are just wildly different. So my way of handling trauma in my life is control. My way of handling trauma in my life, I mean, that's a classic sign of someone who develops an eating disorder. Substances weren't an option for me because of the chaos I saw in my family from all the substance abuse. So control. It's like control. Manage things with rigidity, do well in school, have money in the bank, don't have bills. Like that is my way of handling chaos. My sister's way of handling chaos is bury it under substances. Don't feel it. So she became homeless, at a point in her life when she was very young. And in her mind, that was fine. It wasn't even a big deal. It was just like, oh, I don't want responsibilities. And so she just buried everything under these. She could not stand to feel it. And she had a lot of trauma in her life as well. I couldn't handle her lifestyle. I just could not handle the way she lived her life. And so I disconnected from her. It was just too much chaos, too much screaming. We didn't even grow up together. And it was like, it was worse than what I grew up with. And I just could not deal with it. So we had disconnected, the lying and all that stuff. And
and you actually had a period of time where you were very connected.
Right. And then it just went right back.
Lost 60 pounds.
But that's the point, is there were always periods.
And then there was a relapse.
But that's the point. There were always periods, and you start to trust it. And then there's that violation of trust and the pain that goes along with that. And eventually I was like, no more, I'm done. I can't do this anymore with you. So,
yeah. But the problem was she had children.
Right. And I didn't really know her children. So because we had disconnected, I didn't know her children. I didn't know the little one at all. I'd only seen the older one like once or twice maybe. And so when she was a baby. And so all of a sudden I get this call and she's just hysterical and screaming, and she sounds pretty crazy. And so crazier than in the past. And she's telling me a pretty wild story. And she tells me they'd been taken. And there's a pretty wacky story that goes along with it. I don't want to get too into detail on that. I do write a little more about it in the book, but just for her benefit, I don't want to like go into too much detail about it. But there's a pretty crazy story with it. And I'm like, okay, and I want to hang up the phone so badly. I just want to go back to my regularly scheduled programming of like, life is amazing and I don't want to deal with this. So
yeah, except
I can't.
11-year-old and the 6-year-old are taken into foster care.
Right.
And part of us actually felt relieved because we didn't think they were being raised in a safe environment.
And we weren't sure. We didn't know because I didn't see them for so long.
Yeah. But we were worried about them. And part of it was good. But part of it is, should we get involved? How do we get involved? And it was one of the worst weeks of our marriage.
It was really bad. And
because you guys already know I have this tendency to try to fix
and I'm
people.
like, you are not doing this again. I'm not doing that. I'm not bringing a drug addict into my house. Like I now have a child that is my primary responsibility. And you kept saying this thing, why are you so worried about this? I'm a trained professional. I'm like, you're trained to handle crazy at work. This is my life. I am the expert when it comes to my family. So I've lived with crazy. So I was not buying
and
it.
I'm feeling bad for these girls.
Well, so was I, but I still didn't want crazy in my house.
And so we compromised.
Right.
And I didn't want them all in my house either. But I want to figure out a way to solve it. And we went to Oregon. We visited the kids. And the way we decided to initially handle it was, well, let's see. You can help Tamara deal with Child Protective Service, which incredibly
and because
important.
It was out of state.
If you didn't help her, there's no way she would have ever gotten.
No, she'd never gotten the kids back. But they were out of state, so of course it's much more complicated to try to get kids out of foster care when they're out of state, and you have to travel back and forth. And it was,
which you did,
right,
a lot. And so we set her up in an apartment and
wrapped her in
the kids, wrapped her in services, scammed
and
her.
I was the scariest person in her life. Let's make no mistake about it.
You were the scariest person in a lot of people's lives.
She needed it. She was terrified of me. And I was just like, I'm like, I'm going to help you with this. I will literally drown you in my pool if you screw this up. Like I was done. So I get a call from Child Protective Services, from the supervisor at DHS in Oregon one day. And she's like, we need to have a talk. And I'm like, bring it. Like I was in that fighting mood. And I'm like, I'm thinking I'm going to fight with her about something. She goes, can you soften up a little bit on Tamara? I'm like, what? Like said no DHS supervisor ever. And she's like, no, I'm serious. She's like, we've been having these really long talks. Cause before that she wouldn't talk to DHS. She was like so paranoid. And she's like, she's opening up to us. She's having long talks with us. She's being very cooperative, but she's terrified of you. And I'm like, she's more terrified of me than she is of you? Are you kidding me right now? Like you're calling me to tell me to soften up? So it was an interesting journey, but we finally got the kids out. It was.
Well, I mean, we should talk a little bit more about just the process of dealing with the legal system.
Yeah.
That, they're just not set up often to be very therapeutic.
No,
and they don't think
they're
about
overwhelmed and they're dealing with
at all.
No, it's
so
very cut and dried.
The whole mental health system.
They were happy. They knew who we were and they were happy to have us on board. They're like, oh, this is going to be easy, except my sister didn't make it easy.
And one of the really pivotal parts was Tamara's mother.
Yeah.
Came to live with her.
Because Tamara became suicidal.
And really helped to stabilize the situation. But we had to have them both take our brain health assessment.
Yeah.
And Tamara's
wildly differing brains.
2 and Kathy's a 3. And that combination, they thought one's spontaneous, one's persistent, one, rules don't matter. The other one, rules are the only thing that matters. And so
they were
balancing their brain was helpful.
It's really important too, for me to bring this up because my tendency is to disconnect from people. And because I was forced into the situation, because of the circumstances, I'm like, I'm going to control the hell out of this thing, right? That's how this is going to go. I'm going to scare her half to death into doing what she needs to do because the stakes were high because we had to get these kids out of foster care. So the stakes were high. So I knew that she doesn't care about rules. So the only way for me to get her to care is to scare her in my mind. So I had to terrify her in order to get her to follow through and pay attention. And it was effective. I'm not going to lie. It was effective. But all of a sudden she said something to me one day that she was crying and she looked at me and she goes, I'm so much more than my addiction. And I was like, it was like someone just stabbed me. And I was like, because I was really seeing her as an addict and as just someone who just irritated the hell out of me. And when she said that, all of a sudden I was sort of flooded with these memories of her as a baby and, how she used to follow me around and cling to me. And, I saw her as more than her addiction. And it was a really pivotal moment for me. So.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk more about the journey that has been bumpy, that helping people usually does not go in a straight line, that there are usually ups and downs and ups and downs. And how do you sort of ride the dragon to tame it in a way to get what you need? And in this case, what we needed was stability for these children.
Yeah.
Stay with us.
Welcome back. We're talking about the relentless courage of a scared child. But before we jump into this episode, we need to tell everybody about our event on December 12th.
Overcoming anxiety, depression, trauma, and grief.
Yes.
And it's a
So
free
excited.
event. It's going to be live as opposed to dead. But
Yeah, totally free. We have amazing speakers, and you get a chance to be entered into a drawing for a full evaluation at Amen Clinics.
pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So December 12th, you can sign up for it at tanaamen.com/event. You can also pre-order the book at
relentlesscourage.com.
You can also pre-order the book at relentlesscourage.com and get all sorts of wonderful
Almost
gifts.
$500 in gifts.
So we're on this journey, and you are a scary bitch, which is just how it was.
It needed to
because
happen,
you are
though.
really upset that the children are being raised in an unsafe
Well, and I knew we
environment.
wouldn't get them out if I mean, the stakes were high, and I'm trying to deal with this person who's pretty out of control. And the truth is this, I wasn't exactly sure how much of it was related to substance abuse and how much of it was related to mental health issues. And it ended up being both. So I just didn't have enough information, and I didn't have time to figure it out. And that's a really hard place to be. It's fine. It's all fine and dandy when you've got plenty of time to sort of unwind things and like take your time and, you know, be empathetic. And I had none of that. We had to get these kids out. I was going back and forth out of state, and she was out of control. I couldn't deal with her. Part of it was her trauma. She was traumatized from having her kids taken. Part of it was she was using substances, and part of it was she had mental health issues. So it was very complicated.
And another part is we diagnosed her with Erlen syndrome.
Well, that explains the 19 car accidents, but
Right. And the blue halos. And so we got her diagnosed, we got her treated. She went to AA, and
but it didn't just get better. It got better, then went back down, then it would get better, and then it would drop, and then it would get better. And so we had this up and down. And that's when I began to suspect it was more than just substances. I began to really realize she has a lot of past trauma. She has issues with mental health. She grew up in a very toxic environment with a lot. The deck was stacked with mental illness. And so I began to have more empathy. I was frustrated. I was hurt. For any of you who have grown up in this environment where you've got family members that you know, like you can't just disconnect from them completely, or maybe you have, but it's hard. And it's this roller coaster. It's just this constant roller coaster because you love them, you want to help them, but it's this never ending, like just chaos. It's just chaos. And you can't sort of get away from it. And yet, you know, it's more complicated. I mean, I'm a nurse. I've got loads of life experience, and it was just really hard. And I had no easy answer.
And the kids had been traumatized.
Very
by
traumatized.
what had happened. And they really had no good sense of predictability.
None.
And
how those kids turned out to be such good kids.
And they're both great kids, although the youngest one had a ton of anxiety.
She had a ton of anxiety. She reminds me of me. She's very cynical and she's skeptical, and she's got eyes in the back of her head. And that's how I was. And so she's always waiting for the next bad thing to happen.
Well, and very quickly you became her hero. She wants to be like you. And
we'll see how long that lasts.
so on Mother's Day, 3 years ago, she got the children back, moved down to Southern California, because that way we could at least supervise the situation. But again, not in a straight line, but they're getting services, they're getting the help they need. And it was not easy.
It was not easy.
Your dad was easy. This was hard.
I don't know. I'd go so far as to say it was easy, but this
easier.
Felt almost insurmountable at the time.
And, it turned out that, there are just so many lessons, but one of the lessons is at some point, some people really aren't meant to be day-to-day mothers because they can't manage it.
And here's a big lesson that for me, and I write about this in my book. It's like, for most of us, we fall, we get up, we win, we lose, we soar, we crash. For most of us at the end of the day, it's a choice. And sometimes the disease wins. Sometimes you do everything you can to help people. Sometimes you do everything you can, and you maybe, whether you keep helping them or you don't, sometimes they don't win. And so, she's doing better. She's doing the best she can, but the kids aren't living with her. And so I think she does better when the kids aren't living with her. She misses them terribly. She sees them, but she just has a hard time sort of keeping it together. And I do think that, getting treatment for mental health is just something she's going to always have to do.
Yeah. And so now the kids are with us,
right,
which we adore them. They are,
but I don't
really
have that anger anymore. There's not the anger. There's not the disconnection. She could make me disconnect. If she did certain things, I would disconnect, not because I don't love her, because there's certain things I won't allow in my house. So I did a video on social media about dealing with toxic people. I have boundaries. I'm clear about my boundaries. At this stage in my life, I've done enough work. I've really taken the initiative to understand what healthy boundaries are. And I want you as listeners to think this through. If you've done this work, if you haven't done this work, if you're still suffering with it, I've done the work on understanding what my boundaries are. I've made my boundaries clear to everyone in my life. Everyone knows what my boundaries are. And if they can't respect those boundaries, if they continue after knowing what my boundaries are, I don't like drama in my house. Normal drama is normal drama, but the crazy drama. If they cannot respect that and they continue to bully, threaten, push, violate, lie, scream, that's not acceptable to me. I've got a family, my husband, my daughter, now my nieces, that are my priority, and that is mine to protect. So they have a choice. You can either respect these boundaries or not. And if you can't, I will have to love you from a distance. I will pray for you, and I will love you, and I will miss you.
Well, there it is.
There it is. So I would love to know if you have had to deal with that, if you are still dealing with that, and what your way of dealing with it is. How do you manage your boundaries?
Boundaries are so important, and people often become conflict avoidant.
Yeah, it's not me.
The boundaries become porous, and then people become overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But at some point you have to go, this person is able to do this or they're not able.
Yeah, you got to be honest about it.
And, when we came to that conclusion, she's just not able to do it. You don't have to be good. You don't have to be bad. You don't have to value.
You don't have to be angry about it.
But then you just have to go, okay, so what's the next decision? And we ended up, initially, which caused us a lot of conflict between you and I think we navigated most of it really well together. Now, of course, when it doesn't go well, you blame me.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I told you so, my favorite words.
Yeah, when we were dating, you said I would.
No, I don't know why you keep thinking or remembering it that way.
Because I remember
my favorite words.
I think that must have been a moment of bliss and, oh, I love you so
No,
much.
no, I think that was a moment of bliss that you imagined that.
I didn't.
No.
I didn't, but I'm clear now that you will say, I told you so.
Right. You need to stop and think it through ahead of time, for sure. Like my prepping, you can always continue for the rest of your life to say, thank you, honey. Or I will say, I told you so forever.
So some of the big lessons from Tamara's story is when you're going to help someone communicate with your partner, really come up with a plan together.
Yeah.
If it's going to impact.
Because it impacts
their lives.
everybody. When you've got family members that are struggling with substance abuse or mental illness,
the hardest part.
Or both, they've got a dual diagnosis and it's both. And there's that much chaos. It doesn't just affect one person. It affects all of you. It affects your entire life. And it has the potential to turn your life upside down if you guys are not a team. So you've got to be a team. You've got to be on board together with this.
That's it. And I actually dedicated my book, The End of Mental Illness, to Amelie and Alize, because the whole goal, because they're loaded for mental illness, the whole goal is to prevent it in them and in their babies. Mm-hmm. And it's work, but it's absolutely worth it. What did you learn? Write it down. Take a picture of it. Post it on any of your social media sites.
Make sure you write to me and tag me.
And hashtag Brain Warriors Way podcast. And go to brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Leave us a comment, question, or review. The podcast has been just growing like crazy. We went over 10 million views, and we're just so grateful. Stay with us. At Amen Clinics, we're creating a revolution in psychiatry. All other medical specialists look at the organ they treat before they treat it, but most psychiatrists never look and end up guessing based on whatever symptoms you tell them. But how do you know unless you look? Brain SPECT imaging gives us a new way to look at your brain, to understand and treat your symptoms so you can ultimately know what is going on and feel better. We're in week 5 of the Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. And this is really about the story of the impact of chronic, relentless trauma on a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old. Mm-hmm. And
my nieces.
It's a heartbreaking story. And this is why you never use drugs, mm-hmm. because you saw up front how painful it was. And
my uncle, the one who was a heroin addict, who now is not, often says the one thing he's grateful for from doing heroin is he gave me shock therapy.
Shock therapy, but your sister didn't get the shock therapy, right, or didn't take. And we get involved with these 2 little girls, basically. So we're in the middle of that story, but before we proceed, we're so grateful for the reviews that you leave us. This one is from R. Luna 1 at NYC. I learned about Dr. Amen through another psychiatrist. First, I used his online store to buy supplements and vitamins and felt very happy with them. Thank you so much. Then I learned about the deep work he has been doing with the brain. And because I've been following the development of brain science, I began to appreciate him even more. His podcasts with his wife are so informative and practical. I feel very well informed. I love that. Thank you so much. So I guess the theme for this podcast is grace, in that sometimes the illness wins.
Yeah.
And Despite all of our efforts, sometimes people don't get well.
And it's complicated because sometimes they don't get well because the disease wins. Sometimes they don't get well because they're not ready to take on certain issues. That was certainly true in my sister's case. We had, world-class care for her, wrap turn services, and she would just break down and go into this deep depression and cry and cry and cry. And she told me even though she's got this great therapist, she's like, I can't talk to the therapist about this stuff because the words she used were, it's going to swallow me. I mean, that's how she felt. If I talk about it, it will swallow me. And so she just couldn't face it. And if you can't address your own illness, if you can't take it on, then nobody can make you do that if you're not ready.
No, that's true. Although, for my patients, when they get to that point, I want them to go toward the pain, not away from it. Because when you block it, it then swallows you.
See, I just want to beat it.
I understand. That totally fits your personality. Yes. But so it turned out that, one of the biggest gifts I think she gave the kids was the freedom to live with us.
So, we had our ups and downs. I'm not the most patient person with that type of behavior, with the behavior that goes along with addiction. It's a trigger for me because of my childhood. So I was pretty bossy and pretty strong because the stakes were high. I had to get my nieces out. And so I'd get really frustrated.
You were bossy?
Yeah. Bossy, bitchy, loud. I've been called all of those. So
such a surprise.
So it's okay. I'm okay with that.
People have been listening to us for a while, probably can't even imagine.
I know, right? So, and I tried to disconnect from her for a few times. And you are probably the main reason I didn't disconnect from her. I mean, you really helping me understand that people with addiction don't get better in a straight line. But there was a point where I finally had just had enough. And it was her. She said something that really caused me to rethink how I felt and not disconnect. And it was, not only did she talk about how this was about more than just her addiction, but she's like, up until now, no one has talked about my mental health, but she's like, you still think this is my addiction. It's my mental health as well. And that really gave me more empathy as a nurse. But also, she then did the hardest thing I can think of for any mother. And that was when she said, she was just crying her eyes out. And she said, I love these girls. I love being a mother, but it's not enough for them. That's not enough for them. They need consistency, reliability, structure, and a safe place. And she's like, I have work to do. And so when she said that, she's like, I will always do that work. I'm going to keep doing that work in the hopes that I'm that person one day. But I couldn't imagine what that would feel like if I had to say those words. And so that really, just made me respect her at a different level, that she was willing to do the hardest thing ever. And that is ask us to let her kids live with us.
Yeah, that is so hard because it goes against the
maternal
bond. But sometimes, and I know some of you listening are raising your grandchildren,
or your nieces,
or you're raising
nephews.
Your niece. Yeah, what we're doing is not all that unique.
No,
but we have the ability to do it, and they clearly had the need. And so sometimes it's important to say, sometimes the illness wins.
Yeah.
And I know some of you are living with loved ones who had killed themselves. And I've treated so many families over the year where they just live with guilt. Yet people who die from a heart attack, their loved ones don't live with the guilt, or who die with cancer, or who die from a stroke. They don't live with the guilt. Somehow mental illness is thought of differently. And the whole point behind Relentless Courage of a Scared Child or my book, The End of Mental Illness, is these are brain health issues and they steal your mind. This is why you want to impress upon your kids that they need to just stay away from drug abuse because it steals people's minds. Now, it doesn't steal everybody's mind, and that's where I think it gets confusing. For some people, but you didn't do drugs.
I didn't experiment with drugs. I tried pot twice, and I was like, ew, this is just, yeah.
And because I just thought it was like playing Russian roulette. And some people like playing Russian roulette. I don't like playing Russian roulette, but there's a significant level of the population where it literally hijacks their mind. And in Tamara's case, exactly what happened. It hijacked her mind.
And the girl's father.
And she's working on it. But it's a process that goes positive and then not so much, and then positive and not so much. But there are millions of people who've broken addictions. Of course, be smart, don't start. But if you struggled with it, keep after it until you break those bonds. And part of it is by living a brain warrior's way life.
And if you are a person who has tried to help over and over and over, whether it's your kids or, a family member, a sibling, to get well, to get clean, and it hasn't worked, there's a certain, don't think of like you failed or they failed. It's not your fault that for whatever reason they weren't ready or they just couldn't do it yet. Or even if it's mental illness, it's, if they're not ready or they can't do it, there are times that it's, maybe now is not the time, maybe it's going to happen later. But drawing boundaries is important too. So even with my sister, I think we talked about that in the last episode. It's like, we have our girls now, but there are still some pretty strong boundaries.
We're actually going to talk about it coming up.
Yeah. So we will talk about boundaries and what that means to your own sanity, to your own, mental well-being. But it's not your fault. So
what did you learn? There's a lot to unpack in this story, which has a very good ending. Stay with us. What did you learn? Write it down. Post it on any of your social media sites. The thing I would post is sometimes the illness wins, right? There's only so much people can do.
Yeah. How many of you have taken care of someone or tried to be invested and you felt like either you failed or you were just disappointed and you were angry about it? We want to hear about it because it's not your fault. If someone else just isn't ready or they're not in the right place to receive the help, or they just can't for some reason. So we want to hear from you. And I love to hear from you on Instagram. That's where I answer most of my questions, Instagram and Facebook. So I'd also be grateful if you did pre-order the book. I have a whole bunch of gifts for people, almost $500 worth of gifts. So if you go to relentlesscourage.com, check out the gifts, and there's no obligation, but would love your support and would love, I think pain shared is pain divided. So would love to have you on this journey with me.
Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still talking about Relentless Courage of a Scared Child, and we are just loving having you on this journey with us. We've been talking about addiction and mental illness and how it affects just everybody in your family. And so what are some practical tips that, for you, if you are dealing with someone in your family and you're that person who sort of is the glue, you hold things together, you're the fighter. How do you take care of yourself? What is self-care? What does that look like? And how do you deal with what's going on in your family.
So some practical suggestions like reading The End of Mental Illness, that will help getting them to the right care. And maybe Amen Clinics is part of that. We have 9 clinics around the country. Our Dallas office is opening very soon. We already started scheduling people, so we're pretty excited. But before we get into this, I want to read a review from Kim from Seattle. My therapist recommended the look into Dr. Amen's work. The Brain Warriors Way podcast is the first thing I chose to listen to while running errands in the car. Dr. Amen and his wife Tana speak openly and informatively on issues such as anxiety and depression, and give ideas based on research and how to manage thoughts and behaviors. They discuss a wide variety of topics as it relates to brain health, such as ADD in adults and children, marijuana, substance abuse, nutrition, supplements. Any person at any age in life can benefit from listening to their ideas, whether it is for themselves or someone in their lives. It's nice to get reliable information based on research, and I find their style to be validating and encouraging rather than authoritative. It's like getting to hear the personal conversations of a doctor that a doctor has at home on various topics. Definitely give it a listen. Thanks, Dr. Amen and Tana. Well, thank you, Kim. We are grateful. So if you're dealing with someone who is struggling with an addiction or a mental health challenge, and it is stressing you out because it is stressful, you want to get the help that you can. And sometimes the person who's struggling won't come for help, and we see their family members to help give them ideas.
Yes, self-care is just as important. It's one of the reasons I wrote my book, was because it was a struggle and it was a process. And I think, pain shared is pain divided. It gives people hope. They don't need to live in quiet and shame and all that stuff. But self-care is really important when you're dealing with this. So learning how to, sometimes you have a choice. Sometimes you can walk away. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes there are children involved. Sometimes there are other reasons you can't walk away. And it's really important to learn how to draw those boundaries, which we're going to talk about. But it's also important to learn to take care of yourself and re-energize yourself. So, yeah.
All right. So self-care.
Grace.
Tip number 1. 2 is get information. 3, realize it's more complicated than it may seem, rather than they just choose to not be responsible. It may have to do with frontal lobe function, or it may have to do with toxic exposure. I had a patient this morning, their Lyme test came back positive, and that's why they're overwhelmingly tired. Another patient this morning, their mold test came back positive, which may be why they're anxious. So understand it may be other things than you think, that they just don't care.
And I think finally we have to think about grace and forgiveness. And that's not always easy. And so, because when you, and I think we're going to do an episode I think we need to do that, an episode on just forgiveness, but having grace and forgiving people is part of self-care. And so when you can just learn to, practice this art of letting go and forgiving people and having grace, it's going to help you a lot.
Well, and you remember Christine's son, that actually is the opening story in The End of Mental Illness. I begin chapter 1 with Jared's story, that initially you actually didn't want Chloe to play with him.
Yeah, and I felt so bad. He's the cutest little boy, and now he's a very good-looking older boy. he's a good-looking kid, but I felt so bad because he was just sort of out of control. And so I had this, baby, and I'm like, he's just too out of control. And a lot of other parents felt that way too. They didn't want their kids around them because it felt dangerous.
Right. And so from the outside, it's like, oh, those parents should be better.
Well, I knew better than that. It's just, it still feels dangerous.
Right. But that's what a lot of people would think, right? If they see a child that's out of control. And when we ended up scanning him, he has a pattern we called the ring of fire, where his brain just worked way too hard. And they thought he was ADD, 5 stimulant medications. And stimulating a brain that's on fire is like pouring gasoline.
And guaranteed, a kid like that, if you don't get it treated, she was smart. She got it. She figured it out and got it treated. That's how we reconnected. She got it treated when he was young, because those are the people that self-medicate. They can't stand the noise in their brain.
Our Ring of Fire group often will go to alcohol, marijuana, opiates as a way to try to settle things down. And it can lead them on this road of addiction that we've been talking about, which is just filled with car crashes and accidents and people damaged in their wake.
Yeah. And you know, when you've got people with addiction in your life, I mean, it's hard because, you know, we all want to, you know, help people. We're sort of hardwired to like help people, but it's really hard when you know that it just causes constant, not just drama and chaos, but it's the same stuff over and over. And you know, it's going to do it. It's like, I know the next story I'm going to hear, the next phone call I'm going to get is just going to be the same nonsense.
Well, and it's very important to separate events, because when you live with someone with an addiction, or you love someone with an addiction, every crisis gets imprinted onto the brain and can traumatize you. And so whenever you deal with the latest crisis, you're actually not dealing with the latest crisis. You're dealing with all of them. And often you can make the current one much worse because you overreact, because you're not dealing with the moment, you're dealing with all of the moments. So learning how to separate that is very important.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because that was something you actually helped me with, because I would see my sister as a tornado. In my mind, it's like the minute my phone rang, it's like, oh, here comes the tornado, because it was all of the events all tied together. Or here's one, a rattlesnake. So how are you going to effectively deal with a situation or a person when that's the vision you have of them, when that's your picture?
And so dealing with each moment separately is so important.
And not labeling it something like that is like not coming up with an analogy like that, because it's actually, even though you think it's just an analogy, it's not. It's affecting how you are able to handle it. Because how do you handle a rattlesnake? You just, you know, you chop its head off if you're me. So it's, you know, or
you don't go anywhere near it.
Right. So either way, you're not effective.
Well, we hope this has been helpful for you. Write to us and tell us the stories in your life. You can write to us at brainwarriorswaypodcast.com. Leave us a comment, question, or review. You can also pre-order The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. Go to relentlesscourage.com. If you pre-ordered it at Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or anywhere great books are sold, you can enter your receipt number and get a whole bunch of really helpful, thoughtful gifts. Help us make The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child.
I'm so appreciative of your support.
An international bestseller, because we know it can help so many. Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com, or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.